Hey everybody, this is a new video. I got here with me a friend of mine. We both attend school together. He is a graduate student working towards his PhD in physics. He is a secular like myself. And today we're going to be talking about fake news and alternative facts. So I'm going to hand it over to him and he's going to give you a little bit of his view on what he feels about fake news. So why don't you go, Professor?
Hello, audience. As Com said, I'm going to be talking about misinformation, alternative facts, that kind of stuff. So I think misinformation has become commonplace in our everyday lives. It's on our TV screens when we come home from work. It's on our Facebook feeds when we check it at lunchtime. It's on our discussions with family and friends. Fake news is a very profitable industry in this country. There's a plethora of questionable news organizations springing up in support of nearly any imaginable social or political idea. Conspiracy theorists such as Alex Jones has found considerable support among the general population with demonstrably false news articles. Jones's InfoWars is an example. His website has quite a large following nowadays, with many viewers believing the content to be completely accurate, contrary to supposedly fake news organizations such as CNN, as being labeled the liberal biased news. This presents considerable challenge when trying to have political discourse with those of the opposing political party or even within the same party, where oftentimes both parties are relying on sound bites of shaky factual footing, I think. The campaign and election of Donald Trump has done nothing but worsen the already dire situation of fake news, in my opinion. His former campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, used the term alternative facts during an interview with CNN to describe the information that Donald Trump is receiving and believing. I believe this term to be very dangerous in telling of Trump's intentions for his presidency. Trump seems to believe that a fact that doesn't support his views can be discarded and replaced with alternative facts, or things that do support his views. And as a scientist, this language is beyond troubling. I tend to believe that there is indeed an objective reality in this world that affects all of us individually and collectively. By relying and calling on subjective information and subjective alternative facts, Conway is really saying that objective reality is an enemy to those of Trump's populist campaign. The liberals are in no way shielded from the false news pandemic on their side of the aisle. Special healing lotions, anti-vaccine stances, and no nuclear energy at all cost activists have put a damper on scientific literacy. Some organizations and activists, including feminist groups, have been quoted using false statistics about rape on college campuses, etc., and using those facts to be absolute unshakable, when in reality they are not so. And that's basically the intro to this conversation.
So I think there's a lot of questions about what effect does fake news have? Like, why is it important that we worry about fake news and alternative facts? I mean, to me, they're essentially the same thing. What is your reason for why you think they're so dangerous?
So, in my opinion, I'm not quite sure if fake news and alternative facts are the same thing.
Okay.
And I'll say why I think they might be different. So, alternative facts is a term that Conway used, a specific term. And that term is to say that we know something may not be true, but we're still going to say it's true. And we're going to say it's alternative to truth, essentially. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about false news organizations, the people reading the news and the people who make the news very often believe what they're saying. And the people reading, Breitbart or InfoWars believe what's on the news. And I think people who hear the term alternative facts, they may inside somewhere know that it's not true, but they may have a cognitive dissonance to believe it, essentially. Like they're forcing themselves to believe it, even though they know themselves that it might not be true. So that's how I feel on the two terms.
So can you tell me what is the harm of having fake news, and is it actually harmful, or is it just something we shouldn't be all that worried about?
So even though fake news is a byproduct of free speech, I believe, it is very harmful. It's harmful to our democracy. It's harmful to us as individuals. And I think it's harmful for a couple of reasons, and I'll touch on two of them. One is science literacy, and one is in the political discourse. So in science literacy, I think fake news articles have been very detrimental to what scientists think and believe. especially for physics and biology, as an example. In biology, evolution has been misconstrued by fake news organizations and fake news articles. Evolution is misrepresented. Different sides of the aisle, no matter what the political views are, think incorrect facts about evolution. They think that evolution means that there is no God, or that evolution means that scientists don't believe in a God, which, even though I do not, that's not what evolution talks about. It talks about how plants and animals evolve over time. That's one question I want to talk about. Science literacy in general, the fact that people on the liberal side of the aisle don't understand what people on the other side of the aisle think about science. So a lot of liberals think that conservatives don't understand science, and conservatives think that liberals don't understand science. And that is very true to some extent, because they both don't understand science in general.
Yeah,
Scientist is science.
That's something I'm trying to do with my channel is particularly try to bridge the gap between liberals and conservatives on things that we both agree on, and how to get up to an understanding of what truth is. So
Right. So things like, let's talk about nuclear physics.
okay.
Or nuclear energy, right? Scientists have said for a long time that nuclear energy can be a very productive form of energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty efficient, it's pretty clean, and it's not very dangerous. There has been some problems in the past with nuclear energy, as we know, with Chernobyl and
Yeah.
things like that. But nowadays, nuclear is a pretty reliable form of energy. But people on the left side of the aisle have repeatedly said no to nuclear energy in favor of forms of energy that are actually more costly and more dangerous to the environment than nuclear.
The only thing I've ever heard, particularly about the problem with nuclear energy, is particularly with how to deal with its disposal.
Yeah.
That's a complicated thing. I know there are certain states, most states won't even accept putting it in very safe environments for the most part, because it could still cause problems.
Yeah, that is definitely a problem. And nowadays, people have gotten beyond that pretty effectively.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert on nuclear physics, so I can't really talk too much about it.
Yeah.
But I'll just say that the science is pretty clear that nuclear physics is it's a pretty good option at this
Yeah.
point. That's what I would say about that. There's also what I would call woo-woo science on the left, by like people like Deepak Chopra and things like that use the word like quantum physicsy, really like weird sounding physicsy terms to describe everything, like consciousness. They'll say, well, quantum consciousness, when that doesn't even mean anything. Or they'll say quantum reality, and we're all related in the universe, and we're all floating around in this mystery space-time with wiggly quantum fluctuations and stuff like that, which to some basic extent is true, but it's not what they think it is. It's not what they think it means. And yes, everything is interconnected due to quantum mechanics, but it's correlated so lightly and on such a small scale that humans would never even see the effects.
I'm not a physicist, so you know what, that all sounds to me like somebody who was really high, and they had this really epiphanic view of something.
Well, either really high or really smart.
But both.
Well, they make a lot of money off of saying those kind of views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. There's a big problem with misunderstanding on both sides. I completely agree with that. So this is all very interesting, but I want to get back to fake news real quick. What is the effect that fake news has on a particular individual?
So, actually, I'm going to bring it back to Deepak Chopra. Right.
Okay.
So if I'm just, say, someone at home who isn't going for a PhD in physics, doesn't have a bachelor's degree in physics, and is very science illiterate, and I hear Deepak Chopra on the news, or I hear him online, or I see him in a video, and I hear something that he says about alternative medicine and its quantum effects, and I have cancer, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of going to the doctors or going to the hospital with my cancer, I may think that an alternative route is better for me, even though science clearly states that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And alternative medicine has been proven time and time again to not be the right way to go, especially with cancer, heart disease. So people like Deepak and other alternative medicine junkies are dangerous in the sense that people don't know what's true anymore. They don't know what's alternative medicine and what's medicine. The lines become blurred in the sense that real medicine is scientifically based, alternative medicine is not scientifically based. And people like Deepak, who I guess we should define who Deepak is. He's an alternative medicine guru and a speaker of quantum woo-woo, is what I like to say. So he likes to speak a bunch of bullshit about quantum mechanics, and he likes to throw it in randomly to alternative medicine, and he likes to say we're all interconnected in the world with quantum effects, and to throw in some bullshit medicine stuff. You know.
That's the thing. I see the biggest problem with the way that I see all fake news works is a lot of times they take something that people have a very limited knowledge of, like quantum mechanics. People have a basic understanding. Most people understand that it deals with the very small, but most people don't have it's a very complicated subject. And so when you have somebody like Deepak or other people who try to take those things and they try to make their own views about life with the limited knowledge that other people also have, they're able to convince people without truly doing any of the research that goes into understanding these fields. And I think that's where a lot of the problem comes from. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so Deepak himself isn't fake news, obviously,
No.
but he's a guy who benefits from it. And fake news articles or fake news organizations will take something that he says, perhaps, and then state it as fact or state it as scientifically literate, when that's not the case. And as I talked about with cancer, that's dangerous and different medications. So that's one effect it has on the individual. I'd like to talk a little bit about political groups now and how fake news can be detrimental to conversation and discourse.
So right before we jump into that, just to give people a little bit of knowledge, you would consider yourself a liberal?
Yes.
Okay. I that's just so we don't mislead people into thinking anything else. But you're also not afraid to criticize liberals.
Absolutely not.
I think
I think that most of my political views tend to be liberal.
Okay.
So.
Let's talk about that.
About my political views?
Yeah, no, not your political views. The
political
parties.
Yeah, of course. So hatred among political groups, I think, is a problem, right? Yeah. So fake news on the left and fake news on the right, people see these things, they see false information, and it makes them hate the other group even more. So let's say liberals are looking online and they see something about conservatives doing something racist or saying something about women, which does occur, but a lot of times they'll take it to the extreme or they'll misrepresent the story. And then the liberals see that and they post it on Facebook, and it's not actually true, or it's semi-true. And then other liberals see that and they start ganging up, and then they start to hate whoever was in that article or whoever was falsely accused in that article.
Yeah, they see that as the entire group,
Yes.
instead of a couple of individuals.
They do the same thing that they accuse conservatives of, in the sense of labeling an entire group's beliefs on the actions of a few.
Yes.
Just like with Muslims and things like that. They do the same thing. They say, oh, well, a couple of Muslims are terrorists, so therefore all Muslims. A lot of conservatives would say that.
Yes.
And that's the same thing liberals do on that issue a lot of times. We're all susceptible to those kind of things. Just because we're in a certain political party doesn't mean that we're not as susceptible.
Do you think that's a factor? I know you're not a biologist or a evolutionary, but do you think that might be a factor of how we've evolved for the in-group and out-group? We have an in-group, and as a liberal, we want to support our in-groups of liberals. And conservatives on the opposite side, they see us as the out-group, and they want to fight against those. Do you think it's a factor of that?
Yeah, I would say in general, conservatives tend to relate more to their in-group than liberals. I think liberals tend to be able to see the other side's opinion more often, and they feel empathy for other groups. I would say in general, that's the case. I think conservatives are more concerned with their own group on average. Like religious extremists or just religious people in general, evangelical Christians. Their entire political outlook tends to be based around their religion or what their specific group feels about certain topics. Like their preacher will tell them certain things, and then they'll go home and spout that to their kids or their family, and that's what they believe, is based on what the in-group believes. And I think that like those kind of people tend to be conservative. And
so you think that, correct me if I'm wrong, you think the fake news just exacerbates, because the fake news, you'll see fake news, liberals will watch a particular style of news that caters to their views, and there's fake news that'll push them into more of that direction, and conservatives on exactly the same side. They'll watch conservative news sites, news channels, and news radio that pushes them to constantly hear that same out group is bad, and that's the fake news. That's the dangerous fake news.
Right, so conservatives will see their own, or they'll have their own opinion, and then they'll see a fake news article that backs up their own opinion. Say that they believe all Muslims are terrorists, or most Muslims are terrorists or dangerous, and they see a news article that says, some large percentage of Muslims are terrorists in this country, or 75%, or your chances of dying in a terrorist attack is 1 in 2, 1 in 4. I mean, like, these are extreme cases that I'm saying. I haven't seen a meme quite that extreme on Facebook, but some pretty darn close to that. And I think they'll see that, and it'll back up their own biases, and then they will take that to be truth because they have their own bias about the subject, and they've heard it from other people in their own community that it's true. So why wouldn't it be true?
Yeah.
That's what they think. And liberals do something similar. They think that, not all Muslims are terrorists. A lot of the times they'll say, well, then we shouldn't be fighting, Muslim extremists at all, which I think is going too far on the other way. And I think that that religion in general can be harmful, and I think that the Muslim religion is by definition a religion, so therefore it can be a very harmful force.
I think it might be a better example is labeling the other group. For example, Milo Yiannopoulos, he often gets labeled a Nazi. I wouldn't personally call him a Nazi. I don't think he's ever done anything particularly that would fall in line with Nazis. I don't agree with a lot of his views, and I think he is very controversial. I don't disagree with any of that. But labeling him as a Nazi is fake news in its own right, because it's labeling people to be able to push them into an outgroup, to further push that political ideology. And it's like you were mentioning, for the conservatives, it's often Muslims or other groups that they don't agree with. Often it's anti-Christian. A lot of, I'm saying all conservatives are Christian, but I do see a lot of Christians being conservative. So
right. So liberals will say, well, like people like Milo extremists are Nazis, and conservatives will look at that and say, well, I'm not a Nazi. I don't believe things that Nazis say. And then immediately they reflect on that and they say, well, liberals don't understand me.
yeah.
So that's kind of where the problem relies. There's false information on both sides. Liberals blaming conservatives blaming liberals, and it goes on. And I think it's just hateful. It's a hateful political climate, and it's just no good. Yeah, that's my opinion.
So how do we bridge this gap? For me, I'm making YouTube videos. I am a liberal, but I don't think bad of conservatives, or I don't think bad of most conservatives. There are bad conservatives and there are bad liberals. I made the first few videos I made are mostly targeted at liberals. And a lot of them would say I'm hateful conservative because I'm right of them, but and some would say I'm centralist, but I do find myself to be more liberal. But I want to bridge that gap. I want to strengthen the ties between two different ideologies. How do you think we should go about correcting fake news? Because we talk a lot about fake news, but how do we correct fake news?
So in my opinion, it's actually very difficult.
Yeah.
I personally think it's very difficult. And I think in one realm, I think scientists need to start standing up. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. I think people who are the bearers of knowledge need to start standing up, coming out of the labs, running for office, public office, trying to get people behind their cause and to say, these are the facts, listen to the facts, get off the fake news. The problem with going after fake news is that it is free speech.
Yes.
And it's a very hard thing to go after because it's protected. It's a First Amendment right. But it's also not true. And watchdog online websites like Fact Checker, PolitiFact, things like that, will go through and fact check things online. And I think websites like that are very valuable. And I actually use websites like that a lot, like Snopes. A lot of times they'll be a very good source for me because they'll fact check and then they have sources.
Yes. On
the website. And I think websites like that will become very, very important to our democracy in the future. I think it is a matter of life and death. I mean, I actually think it is.
So we talked about science. There's not many science people in office. It's a lot of lawyers, a lot of pretty much people who don't have to go through the same sort of rigorous complexity of deciding what's true. It's more of lawyers don't have to care about what is actually true. They have to convince people what is true.
Yes.
And that's a huge difference. So a big thing that I don't think is science is political. I don't think science is political. Science is about finding the truth. So why should scientists? I do agree. I would like to see more scientists. There's very few engineers. I'm in an engineering degree, and there's only one engineer person in office.
Yeah.
And we follow a very similar structure to science of dealing with logic and reasoning to come up with truths. We don't necessarily go through the whole scientific rigor of research and getting our papers published and stuff like that. I think that would be inefficient in a political office, obviously. But there's also not a lot of trust for a lot of scientists. I see that a lot with this particularly a lot with this Trump campaign of distrusting scientists, particularly on issues that he disagrees with, such as climate change and vaccinations. How do we encourage people to trust those scientists again?
Right. So scientists as a group are a pretty humble bunch, and
Yes.
I think that can be a problem because we don't stand up for our beliefs. So if I'm going to a science conference and I want to talk about climate change, me personally, I would never do that.
Well,
Right, because I'm a quantum physicist.
You're a quantum physicist.
Right. So I would absolutely never talk about climate change at a conference. Just because even though I probably know more than 95% of the population about climate change, if I'm at a conference and I know there's world experts at that conference, in no way, shape, or form would a scientist ever go up there and start talking about something that they don't absolutely know because of ridicule. Other scientists will look at it and say, no, you're wrong. They'll completely shut them down. But for some reason, in the political discourse, that's exactly what people do. They know absolutely nothing about what they're talking about. Politicians and lawyers will go up there and say, well, climate scientists say this and climate scientists say that, even though they don't. And they'll spew some crap and say that they're world experts on the subject. I understand that they are the barrier between scientists and the public. So they have to say something about science. I understand that. So politicians should be quoting scientists instead of coming up with their own interpretation of the facts.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, I've seen. I mean, there's some funny videos of politicians coming in with snowballs and saying, "Look, it's cold outside, therefore climate." But you're not a climate scientist.
No.
And one of the things that I find odd when they're talking about how there's all these scientists who don't agree with climate change and stuff like that is they're saying scientists. Well, they could be talking about meteorologists who understand weather. They could be talking about biologists who understand biology, but they don't necessarily understand the climate. So there's no reason they should be even worrying about those particular people who study something that's beyond what they do, because science is such a vast and understanding physics doesn't mean you understand climate. Just because you understand climate doesn't mean you understand biology. Just because you understand biology doesn't mean you understand X, so on and so forth. So when you have to really understand who they're quoting and why they're saying those people don't believe it. They say scientists, people often quote the 97% of climate scientists believe in man-made climate change. But then the retort is often, well, I know all these scientists who don't. Well, what do they study? What is their credentials? And that's an important part of...
Right. So if they're talking about, a sociologist at a think tank,
Yes.
About climate, about the climate, well, yes, technically they may have an opinion on climate change, and technically they are a scientist. But that doesn't mean that they're an expert on climate change. So we should be talking about world experts on climate change when we're talking about that. And the figure of 97%, I'd say that's probably accurate. And I think it's a very good thing that some scientists are against climate change. That's my personal opinion. I think there always should be skeptics. We should never be completely on board with anything. It's great that there's dissent and there's papers being written about it. But yet policy should be on what the consensus is. That's my personal opinion.
So I was watching Milo had a debate last night at the University of New Mexico, and somebody asked him about it was actually one of the professor there, if I remember right. He was a professor of Sorry if I remember. Ethics. He was who does the ethics? What field?
Philosophy?
Philosophy. Thank you.
I love
He was a philosophy professor, and he brought up that 97. I think his quote was something along like, if you had the CIA who said 97% of the CIA believes that Cuba has nuclear missiles. I don't think it was Cuba that he specifically said, but Cuba has nuclear missiles. Shouldn't we take that as a very serious concern, and we should do something about it? And obviously, Milo understood what he was referring to, where he was talking about climate change, and Milo's retort to that was, if 97% of anybody says something, that's something to be concerned about. Which, yeah, you should be concerned you would be concerned about that. I can understand why some people might say, if there's such a consensus, but there's not a super consensus. There's 97% of the climate scientists see the data, and they've each come up.
Right, but even better than 97% of people, it's 97% of climate scientists.
Yes,
it's even stronger. It's an even stronger identification.
Yeah. How do you argue against people who will deny beyond you can't it's not science is not necessarily consensus. Scientists, while not necessarily called scientists, the biggest the greatest minds used to think that the world was the center of the earth.
Yes.
And that wasn't true. It was a consensus that the world was the center of not the earth. The world was the center of the universe until it wasn't Galileo. There was another gentleman. I don't remember the
Copernicus, I think it was.
No, there was another guy who actually came before them who came up with the idea before Galileo and Copernicus.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I can't think of his name, but yeah.
Can't remember his name. Yeah. And he was a laughingstock.
Yes, of course.
But I think what you have to do in today's science, if you don't agree with something, and it's perfectly fine to not agree with climate in science, with climate change in science, and it's good to not necessarily just accept it. If you want to prove it wrong, prove it wrong. That's the thing that I think a lot of people misunderstand is you need to, if you don't want it to be true, you want to prove something to be false, like evolution, then prove it to be wrong and I feel most scientists would be grateful to be proved wrong because
Yes.
It's something new and fascinating to
it's far more interesting in general.
Yeah.
Right, to have something new. And I think science works in a fascinating way in that all you have to have is one proof of being wrong and the entire theory is gone. But you can never prove it right. You can never prove it right 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. But it just takes one time to prove it wrong, especially in physics, right? So let's talk about, the theory of gravity. Let's say that, a physicist is doing quantum experiments and he finds out, this is hypothetical, mm-hmm. but he finds out that gravity is, 1% stronger at some scale. And it's verified. And that means the theory of gravity needs to be re-looked at. It's thrown out. It needs to be corrected. Yeah. All it takes is one verified experiment.
That would be
insane.
It would change.
It would be insane. Yeah, and there is no connection as far as we know. Well, I take that back. There is a connection, but I mean, there's no theory that eloquently connects quantum mechanics and general relativity at this point. And if the equations are in the books, it essentially would be an equation of everything, because every phenomenon that we know is affected by general relativity or quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics affects things on the small scale. General relativity affects things on the very large scale. So if we could unite those two theories, that would be great.
For those who don't know what very large scale, I'm personally not a physicist. So what is considered very large scale? Because, I mean, we all understand a very small scale even is kind of hard. Like, at what point would we consider quantum? Atoms or smaller
so
than
just to
atoms?
give you an idea, so there's technically not really an exact limit, I don't think, where quantum goes away, because quantum the macroscopic object is a limit of quantum mechanics. So a free particle, something just flying around in outer space, can be modeled quantum mechanically, and you get a free particle out of it using quantum equations with no potentials. But back to your question, Just in general, things on the scale of an atom, things on the scale of neutrons, things on the scale of photons. The scale of photons is an interesting thing anyway, because the size of a photon is another topic for discussion that we can't really get into. But yeah, on the scale of a few angstroms, on a scale of that's the realm of quantum mechanics. There's a couple scientists who have done things, the size of buckyballs, which you've heard about in chemistry.
Yeah.
People have done that. People can probably do larger objects with diffraction, which is a quantum effect. But yeah, so people do that. But for everyday objects, like Newton's theory in the 1700s is perfectly fine. So if I'm talking about a car driving down the road, I don't need to touch quantum. I don't even need to touch general relativity, even though Newton's equations are completely wrong. They're just wrong. They're not correct, but they're a good approximation, and they're completely wrong on the large scale and they're completely wrong on the small scale. Right. So if we take the quantum equations and we let n go to infinity, we get classical objects. But around things like the black holes, neutron stars and things like that, a lot of times it breaks down. So quantum mechanics and general relativity break down at, for example, the event horizon of a black hole, which is where the very small and the very, very strong gravitational forces come into contact. So you have a gravitational force that's so strong that light can't even escape, and you have interactions that are taking place so close that it's within the quantum regime. So you get two happening at the exact same place. So that's where the theories interact. But in the everyday world, when we're talking about Newtonian physics, we're talking about pencils and phones and things that size. Actually, not phones. That was a bad example because transistors are in phones, and that's quantum mechanics.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of quantum in that. I shouldn't say that, but just the size of a phone, an object the size of a phone. But in quantum mechanics, objects the size of atoms in general, I would say.
Well, this is. I know we got a little bit off track.
Yeah, I was completely off track.
This is completely off track.
Completely, yes.
And I think we're going to stop it here. This has been a great talk. I would definitely want to get back with you and talk about some more great stuff. Next time what do you want to talk about next time?
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to think about it.
We'll have to think about it. We'll come up with a good idea. If anybody's watching, let us know what you guys think. What do you want to know from the professor?
Probably just more quantum, right?
More quantum. Quantum's great. I love quantum.
Constant.
Yeah, so let me know. Write it down in the comment section. And if this is the kind of thing that you enjoy, let me know. Like, share, and subscribe. And have a good one, guys.